Now, health officials have published voluntary guidelines for limits on the amount of sugar they believe should be in everyday foods, including breakfast cereals and chocolate bars. The aim is to cut the amount of sugar children across the UK consume by 20% by the end of the decade. Here's our health correspondent, Jane Draper.
It's tempting stuff, but eating too much sugar is rotting children's teeth and fueling obesity. A third of children are overweight or obese when they leave primary school. Now, as part of government plans to tackle the problem, the food industry is being given new limits for how much sugar should be in 9 popular foods. Companies are being urged to reformulate their products so they contain less sugar or to make them smaller. The aim is for the UK's annual diet to contain 200,000 fewer tonnes of sugar by 2020.
We expect people to see over time smaller chocolate bars, smaller cakes, smaller biscuits, particularly when they eat away from how they're eating in family restaurants and so on. We also expect people not to notice the changes because we know if changes are gradually made to our food, generally we don't notice them. Your bread is now 40% less salty than it was 10 years ago. I bet you haven't noticed.
Everyday foods like these will be affected. The companies that make them are being told to cut their sugar and calorie content. And cafes and restaurants are being told to take action too, because up to a third of the calories we eat are now consumed outside the home. And there'll also be the new tax on sugary drinks starting in a year's time. Dietitians say there's no time to lose in trying to improve children's health.
Around 1 in 5 10 to 11-year-olds are obese. We know from research that excess sugar is linked to weight gain. And when you are obese, you're more at risk of conditions like type 2 diabetes, which can lead to heart disease or even blindness.
The food industry isn't being forced to make these changes, but trade bodies say they'll take on the challenge. And experts in nutrition think this is the quickest way to improve our diets.
It's actually an advantage that they're voluntary, because the legal process of writing mandatory guidelines is so awkward, so long, people resist it and try and protect their own interests, that doing it on a voluntary basis is actually quicker to write the regulations and quicker to amend them if they don't work.
The 9 food groups announced today account for less than half of children's total sugar intake, so there's still work to be done on sugar that's less obvious in foods like pasta sauces. Health campaigners have praised the plans, but they want the government to keep up the pressure on food companies. Jane Draper, BBC News.
With me now is Kawther Hashem, a researcher and nutritionist from the charity Action on Sugar. It's good to see you. Thanks for coming in. Is all this a good idea, and does it make sense that it's voluntary and not mandatory?
It's a good idea overall, but there is the concern about it being voluntary. There's nothing to force any companies that don't want to comply with these new guidelines. So that is a major issue of it.
If the companies don't come forward and agree to this and make the changes that health officials believe should happen, then what?
Well, they've given them until 2020, and they're going to be publishing data to show basically for NGOs, charities, academics. They're going to be showing to them whether these companies are complying or not. And hopefully they'll also be showing it to Department of Health, who then will be able to come up with measures that will force those companies to comply. We don't know what these measures are yet, but hopefully, the threat of those measures is the main point.
I was going to say, I suppose implicit is the threat that it could become compulsory for you companies to actually sort this out.
Yeah, and the compulsory measure would be like what's applied to the sugar levy on drinks. So I think because they know the government is kind of already implemented something like that there is a risk of it going to other category of products, and therefore that would encourage companies to really do something about it right now.
The figures are stark, aren't they? A third of children are overweight or obese by the time they leave primary school.
Yeah, absolutely, which is why we need these strong measures to come in force. We need these companies to change products, because these are popular products with kids, and they eat what adults are eating, and it's important that these are gradually changed so that our taste preferences and the whole population's taste preference are adjusting gradually.
So it would have to be over a sort of lengthy process in order for people to not really notice, but they will perhaps notice the size of a chocolate bar going down.
Perhaps they'll notice that, but the idea is that they do different types of measures. So you've got reformulation, you've got reduction portion sizes, and you've got promotion on the healthier products. So all these measures together hopefully will kind of shift our sugar intake to lower amounts, particularly for children.
Okay, Kawther, Hashem, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming in. Thank you. Now the government has set out